I don't particularly want to see a Sasquatch. That's not going to do me any good. I want to kill one. This is the only way we're going to prove it. We have to bring in the body. There is no other way that the scientific establishment will accept it.
Sasquatch, the anthropology of the unknown. To kill or not to kill a Sasquatch is the last of 5 programs based on a rather unusual conference on humanoid monsters held at the University of British Columbia in 1978. It is prepared by Radio Canada International's Susan Lumsden, who attended the controversial sessions on that elusive Pacific Coast creature known as the Sasquatch or Bigfoot. When all the points were made for and against the existence of the huge ape-like creature, academics and hunters alike decided that the only real proof would be the actual body of a Sasquatch. The question then was, dead or alive? In this program, 4 of the outstanding delegates to the Sasquatch conference state their reason: kill or not to kill a Sasquatch. First, John Green of Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia, a veteran Sasquatch investigator.
In case any of you are not aware, I'm one of the villains in this piece. I believe that the collection of a specimen is necessary and that there is no reason why one should not be collected. I am not a hunter, so it isn't that I'm bloodthirsty, but I am entirely convinced from study of the information available to me that what we are dealing with is strictly an animal, that there is no relationship to the human whatsoever except in the way that it walks and stands upright. The question of intelligence, as far as I'm concerned, is where does it rate for intelligence with the chimp and the gorilla, not where does it rate in relation to man. This being an animal, what are the arguments for treating this animal in a preferred way? And in all these years, the only one that has been apparent to me in many, many discussions is that we see in it a reflection of ourselves. And I consider that to be an attribute of ours and not of the animal. But if anyone wants to argue that it's okay to kill anything else for any reason, amusement or whatever, but never a Sasquatch, then I say that it's up to him to produce his reasons why we should make this exception for this particular animal. We heard this afternoon a great deal about the means by which we turn to science as the authorities on what is real and what is not real in our culture, and the people in the branch of science that deals with animals make it quite clear that they have to have an actual specimen. So we've got to have the thing in the flesh before anything will be settled. Then, of course, the question is, well, wouldn't it be better to have a live one? Well, with that, I don't disagree. However, in order to make the studies that would be made, these studies would require not one, but a fair number of dissections. So you might take an extra 100 years and an extra $1 million in order to succeed in getting the first one alive, but the number that would die as a result would be the same anyhow. Well, if you put sufficient resources into it, presumably you could trap one, but we all know what kind of resources are available to us as long as there's no proof that the thing exists.
The next speaker in the debate to kill or not to kill a Sasquatch was one of the few game wardens at the conference. He is Dr. James Butler of the Province of Alberta Parks Department, and this is what he had to say.
My conflict lies in the fact that I'm both a scientist and an environmentalist. And my feeling is that we should be working together now toward a consistent protective ethic, not a killing ethic. If we try to encourage the philosophy of kill today and protect tomorrow, or we'll kill 1 or 2, or we'll kill up to 6, and then we won't. Then we'll start to protect again. I'm sorry, but that doesn't work. It is also very highly hypocritical. It would be very difficult to change people's attitudes and motivations back to protection once you've encouraged them to shoot and convinced them that it's all right to shoot. It would be difficult to stop the killing or to prosecute against further killing once protection had been enacted at a later time. Widespread motives for killing from the scientific community will hinder eventual chances at establishing protective tracts of land and protective legislation. And such a reversal in attitudes will only confuse the general public. So let's maintain a consistent environmental ethic, and let's not try to convince ourselves that the end justifies the means. Instead of shooting first, I think we should be trying to communicate first. And instead of developing the image of mobs with torches rushing the castle, let's act like the advanced and civilized society that we're supposed to be. And we should be encouraging the types of things that Diane Fossey is doing with mountain gorillas right now. And if we continue in a trend of violence in our contacts, we may delay the chances of such communication for years and years, if not forever. Another possibility is that we could be killing or threatening perhaps the only other living hominid. I'm sure you've heard this, and indeed that would be most unfortunate. If the Sasquatch is not a hominid, that does not weaken the value of the protection in my mind. I would hate to think something would have to be related to us to be granted the necessary asylum. Some of my colleagues here favor mass education, encouraging people to shoot the Sasquatch toward the end of achieving again our first specimen. And Mr. Green's latest book even suggests where to aim. And such a mass educational campaign I find extremely frightening. And as a result of such a campaign, the risk of human beings being killed I regard as dangerously high. Hikers, hunters, fishermen, practical jokers. It's been strongly suggested that a Sasquatch is hard to kill, at least difficult to immediately bring down. And for every Sasquatch brought in dead, I have to ask how many more would be wounded and escape to die undetected. And there is every reason to believe that such numbers could be quite high. And we should also consider impact on a group by shooting perhaps a dominant male if it should so prove to be a patriarchal society or group, or the impact of shooting a dominant female if it should so prove to be a matriarchal organization. All speculation, but the danger is certainly there. A real impact would affect a great many individuals, and indirect effects on an even larger portion of the population. And there's no way I could ever endorse that. And no one can assure that that wouldn't happen. We should also be prepared for the possibility of adverse reactions to being wounded. This is the rogue elephant risk. I won't deny that I would love to personally examine the dead individual that would be shot and brought in, but I would hate to be the individual that kills the first one. Apart from the contribution which would be afforded, and I certainly don't deny that, and apart from the legal hassles that would result with public environmental attitudes as they are, I'm afraid that whoever pulls the trigger would be remembered by history along with such persons as John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald, and James Earl Ray. It's been discussed in terms of a possible game violation, but it may be much more serious than that. The Sasquatch may appear to be somewhat widespread from the reports, and this should not reflect that they are common or secure in their environment. I take exception to all references that they would not qualify as a rare or endangered species. There are a great many species that were once widespread, but due to environmental modifications are now quite scattered and local. The more widespread a population, the greater the chance of fragmentation due to environmental modification. There exists for animal populations what we refer to as a critical population level, below of which they will likely not return. We don't know the critical population limits that would exist for a Sasquatch population. We do know that range fragmentation and environmental stress are contributing factors toward reaching a critical population level. They would both likely be well represented in this phenomenon. Proposing we go ahead and kill one or more especially considering the implications discussed previously, is, in my opinion, comparable to walking toward the edge of a cliff in thick fog. We should consider whether it is in the best interest of a Sasquatch to be verified. And it would sound blasphemous to my taxonomy professor at Ohio State to be saying what I'm saying to you now. But I am not certain that it would be in the animal's best interest to be verified. My fear is that the attention could be smothering. I caution against the same attitude that was displayed by the general in Vietnam who was quoted in the press as saying, "We had to destroy the village in order to save it." A specimen in captivity for a day or two, then released, subjected to all manners of tests, x-rays, etc., would be proof. It would be verified proof. And don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If we were to find today a new and unknown tribe of people in some remote jungle in South America, we wouldn't rush down to shoot a few of them to verify their existence. And why should we treat a Sasquatch any different? Let's not allow our anxieties and impatience to override the rationality of good common sense.
James Butler's viewpoint, not to kill, was supported by the following speaker, Dr. Robin Ridington of the University of British Columbia. But Ridington's angle was somewhat different.
I'm here as an anthropologist, and I'm speaking on behalf of an endangered species, namely the species of human beings. That's the species that I study. I think we have seen from this conference that the image of the Sasquatch is very definitely a cultural phenomenon that has been growing in our culture over a number of years. And this image is being shown on TV, it's being widely covered by the media, and a number of people now know what a Sasquatch looks like, know how it moves through the woods. Those of you who were here last night, I think, had a very impressive feeling of this as an image, as a cinematographic experience, seeing both of the films last night. We have seen that there is something with a gait which is like a human gait, but slightly different in a subtle and intriguing way, something that moves through the mottled light and darkness of the woods in a kind of phantom-like way that excites the people who see it. In both cases, the photographer was excited. In one case, the photographer told us that he was in a dreamlike state. He didn't quite know, he couldn't believe what was happening to him, and I would be in that state of mind too if that was happening to me. Every hunting season, people go out searching for an image of a deer and shoot a cow. The distinction between two pronograde creatures in the darkness it's an understandable mistake. However, if you're looking for an image of an orthograde creature, namely something with a gait that's only slightly off from that of a human being, you're out in the early morning or the late night. You are out after having driven 10 hours or whatever. You're out drunk. I mean, a lot of hunters are drunk, let's face it. A lot of them are. Or you're simply out, not drunk, but kind of drunk with the change from being in the city. And you see some poor bearded guy in a heavy jacket walking through the woods at 100 yards away, and you have a rifle that's capable of reaching 100 yards across into that distance. My opinion is that in this frenzy for searching for a Sasquatch in this way, that a human being is going to be killed. And I think the probabilities are relatively high. I don't think finding Sasquatches for zoologists as type specimens is important enough to risk any human life.
Perhaps the most thorough speaker in the debate to kill or not to kill a Sasquatch was Dr. Grover Krantz of the University of Washington's Department of Anthropology. It was not the first time he'd spoken to the conference on humanoid monsters, but it was the most revealing, not only about the Sasquatch, but about himself. Dr. Grover Krantz.
I brought a little object along here just to make my own case sound all the more grim and indefensible. This is not the lower jaw of a Sasquatch, but it's the kind of specimen that I would like to get. And this, of course, is rather grim to a lot of people. It'd be even more grim if it were dripping and freshly removed. But I want to make my case as difficult as possible and see what happens here and see how you like it. I have a very personal bias in this whole matter of the Sasquatch as far as a proven existence is concerned. I want the question settled as soon as possible, not eventually, not when I'm old or when I'm dead. I would like it settled now. I've stuck my neck out on the subject, and I have paid a rather bitter price for it. And I'm hoping that someday it may come out. Okay, as I said, that's selfish. Most of you probably have not paid that kind of price. You have not stuck your necks out and badly damaged a professional reputation in the process, so most of you don't really know what I'm talking about. Thank you. I think Dr. Carlton Kuhn does know very well what I'm talking about. Okay, now I'll go a little bit further, and this may surprise some of you as well. I do not particularly enjoy the search for the Sasquatch. I would like to see the finish of the search, but the search itself, the activity, the mystery, the intrigue, the romance of it, I find this a bit of a drag. I've got other things to do. I've got a regular profession. I'm studying human evolution. This is possibly a part of it. It is far from the whole picture. Now, I'd like to get it settled and get on with what I consider probably more important. Okay, the kind of proof that would be required by the scientific world, which it would happen to be the proof that would be required to vindicate my reputation, is a body or part of it like a pile of bones. There is nothing else that will prove it to the scientific world. I've talked to just about every one of the big wheels in the subject, and they will not accept film evidence, they will not accept feces, they will not accept hair. None of this is proof. It may be suggestive, it may be convincing to a fraction of them, but across the board proof, no. They will not accept it. Most of them know there is no such thing as a Sasquatch. Most of them know quite correctly that most of this evidence can be faked. Therefore, any evidence that's brought in is, by definition, a fake. You have to bring in a piece of evidence that they cannot say is faked. This would be that kind of evidence. The kind of evidence, a piece of body or bone or something like that, that can be gone back to and looked at again and again. You can go off, shake your head, beat your head on the wall if you want to, and then go back 6 weeks later and look at it again and it's still there. That is the kind of evidence that the scientific world will accept. Now, I happen to have a good deal of evidence myself that I have examined. I'm satisfied that the Sasquatch is real. I don't think I'd walk a mile to see one. I'm that convinced. But the trouble is, my evidence is almost entirely in my own head. If I pass it on to someone else by words, it's secondhand. It's one part removed. They don't know if I'm telling the truth. I know. You don't. And if you believe me, I think you're gullible. If you believe yourself, you're all right. All right. There are three possible general approaches for producing the definitive, conclusive evidence of whether or not Sasquatches are real. One of them is a few bones, the second is a fresh kill, and the third is a capture. The first one, just a few bones, this would be my choice, by all means, overwhelmingly. I'd like to get hold of the skeleton of a Sasquatch. That's the part of the body I want to see. I don't want to have a half a ton of stinking Sasquatch wrapped around that skeleton. I want just the bones. The possibility of getting a skeleton of a Sasquatch is, however, rather problematical. Well, the likelihood of a hunter having brought down a Sasquatch in the past is, I think, fairly good. Finding him is the problem. The likelihood of running across a Sasquatch skeleton for any other reason, that is, one that died a natural death, is essentially zero. The Sasquatch, like any other animal, assuming, of course, that it's real, when it comes to its end, it dies a slow natural death. And the animal will be ailing. The reason we don't find Sasquatch skeletons is because they hide themselves like a bear does, and they're covered with vegetation. Small animals destroy the body, and it's almost impossible to find them. I've talked to a number of bear hunters and bear guides, asking them how, when, and under what circumstances they find bears that die a natural death. So far, the grand total of bears that have died natural deaths is 0. Not one has been found by any game guide that I have talked to. There are at least 100 bears for every Sasquatch. After we found the first 100 bears, we ought to be due for a Sasquatch skeleton. I'm not that patient. I'm trying to further the idea of bringing in a specimen. I'm not necessarily saying I'm encouraging people, everybody here, to go out and try to shoot a Sasquatch. Of course, some of you would not go for the idea whether I said so or not. There's nothing I could say that would convince you. There may be a few of you who are wavering in doubt. If you're not very serious about it and you're not pretty sure you know exactly what a Sasquatch is or would look like, I recommend you don't do it. I don't want you to go out shooting people any more than any of the other speakers want you to go out shooting people. The risk of shooting someone is, of course, a very real thing. Now, often in the past, when I've talked on this subject, I have gotten another response I think I should address at this point. Why don't we shoot an anthropologist? And they go, they're usually a little more specific. They suggest me. I'm sure this question has come up in some of your minds here, and I have, I hope, a very simple answer to it. I am standing here. You can examine me. You can find me in Pullman, Washington anytime you want to. If we could go and look at a Sasquatch as conveniently as you can look at me, then I would be in the forefront of saying absolutely do not shoot a Sasquatch for any reason. It would be unnecessary. But nobody can scare up a Sasquatch on demand. There's no amount of money you can pay to see a Sasquatch. There's no amount of political power that will entitle you to see one. But if we bring one down, at least we can examine the remains and find out for sure if they're real. Of course, I should add, by the way, finding out for sure they're real is just one of the reasons I want to bring one down. The second reason, I think, is fairly obvious. I want to find out for sure exactly what it is, if it is one of the fossil hominids or some new type of animal that we haven't suspected. And third, of course, I'd like to rub a few noses in it. But I think you all have the same impulse. Okay. The possibility of capturing a specimen has been raised somewhat here, and I would like to add just a few comments to what's already been raised on this. The only feasible way that is even remotely possible to capture one is to bring it down with a tranquilizer gun. We don't know anything about the body chemistry of a Sasquatch, and we don't know exactly how heavy they're going to be, exactly what kind of dose of what kind of drug you should shoot them with. If you shoot them with too little, if you're so lucky as to get anywhere near a Sasquatch, you shot him with a tranquilizer gun. That's a big dart that goes at a rather slow speed with rather poor accuracy. You're probably not going to be more than 100 feet away. And if that wasn't enough to bring him down, it might hurt. And you're going to be 100 feet away from a Sasquatch that's been badly hurt. I wouldn't want to be there. But suppose you succeed. This is always a question, a problem I raise. You're out in the boondocks somewhere. You've left your pickup truck 14 miles behind, and you've walked around, and you found the Sasquatch. You're so lucky. You shoot him, you hit him, you got the right dosage, he falls unconscious at your feet. There's 800 pounds. What do? Throw him over your shoulder and carry him back? How are you going to protect him as he lies there? Build a house around him? Tie him up with chains, inject more drugs? Okay, do all that, whatever's necessary. Protect him from the bears, or they're going to have a feast. Then you go back, you get in your truck, you go to the nearest telephone, you call the nearest zoologist or physical anthropologist you can reach on the telephone. And you know what he's going to say? They won't even talk to you. They'll just say, just forget it. Just go drink, and have another drink, and don't bother me. People will not go out to examine the darn thing. But suppose you're so lucky you get me, Carlton Kuhn, a few other of us nuts. We go out and examine your carcass, and you decide you want to let it go after you've had us look it over. Who's going to believe me and Carlton Coon? We already are committed to a serious, if not belief, at least take the subject very seriously. They're not going to believe us. You also might consider another question. You've tranquilized the animal. You didn't kill it clean with a moment of pain. You tormented the thing. He was captured. He's scared. He's angry. You release him finally, and you consider, what's that Sasquatch going to think? He's going to think people are pretty nasty. He might never want to see another human being in his life. On the other hand, he might wake up or come get his faculties all back again and decide he's going to kill every human being he can lay his hands on. I don't think I would want to have a bunch of people's lives on my hands like that. There are a number of Sasquatch hunters, not academic people, but what might be called amateurs, who are out in the field, who are trying to bring in evidence of the Sasquatch. I'm going to make some nasty comments about them in general, not all of them. And you see how the shoe fits. Most of the Sasquatch hunters are trying to bring in the definitive evidence. Some of them haven't thought this all through yet, or might even disagree with me on this, but consider, they think that the man who brings in the first proof is going to be rich and famous. He's going to be famous. I don't think he's going to be rich. Somebody will steal whatever money there is away from you. You can count on that. You will be famous, however. All right, that's the first man who brings one in. What happens after that? The scientific establishment will move in, take over, kick everybody else out, claiming they knew all along that it was real. You, number one, you made it. All the rest of you hunters, you're finished. If you're not the first one, you're nobody. I think most of you know that, too. You're a nobody for the rest of your life, or whatever you were before you got into this. Okay, considering that, what do you want that other hunter to do? You're going to carry the gun yourself. You want him to go out with a tranquilizer gun, or the net, or whatever. And you know he's never going to get it. And if you can convince everybody else to go out with tranquilizer guns while you've got that high-powered rifle, you might be the one who wins.
That was Dr. Grover Krantz of the University of Washington, concluding this fifth and final program on Sasquatch, the anthropology of the unknown.